Hey there, beautiful people. Will gluten-free foods enhance your health outcomes, or are they just another food fad? Are all gluten-free foods good for you? Today, I am going to crack the gluten-free code, and you're not going to want to miss this one. Stay tuned. So hey there, this is Lindy Ford, registered dietitian, clinical and licensed nutritionist, and nutrition detective. We are cracking the gluten-free code today. Again, if you could just join us and subscribe to this channel, lots of great information this year. I am just posting things that are going to be beneficial to you, and this is a topic that is hot and a lot of people want to know about. Is gluten-free really good for us? Well, what is gluten? Actually, what gluten is, it's a combination or a mixture of two proteins, glutenin and gliadin. And this actually makes that dough texture sticky, and therefore the name gluten, which means glue-like. Actually, it also helps the dough to rise, and it gives it that really good texture that most of us really love, including myself. It's in grains like wheat and spelt and rye and barley. And it can also be mixed into everything. And we're going to go over that in just a few minutes about how insidious it is in so many of our foods. What we know, beautiful people, is that gliadin, that one protein, is normally the biggest culprit when it comes to gluten intolerance or gluten sensitivity. And most of us have heard of celiac disease, right? So celiac is a true autoimmune disease where gluten is attacking the small intestine, and it really does actually, it makes the body attack itself. And so we know that that can be detected by a lab test. And so you can know if you have celiac disease or not. And some celiac diseases present with irritable bowel symptoms like diarrhea and bowel discomfort and stomach problems and stomach aches. But some actually just present with fatigue. And we know that all celiac has a problem. They all have a problem with nutrient deficiencies, because once that bowel gets disrupted, the GI gets the whole microbiome gets disrupted, then you're not going to have the nutrient absorption. But there's another class of people, and I really believe this to be true, that are more like gluten sensitive. They're not completely gluten intolerant. They don't have those big symptoms that the celiacs have, but they are more sensitive to gluten. And so I always say that there are like a class of people that would benefit to be completely gluten-free, because what we know, and we do know this through studies, is that gluten or gliadin, I'll say gliadin from now on out, actually leads to something called leaky gut, which disrupts the barrier of the small intestine, like we said with the celiacs. It creates this inflammatory response, and leaky gut is a real thing. I believe that, and a lot of bad things can happen, because when leaky gut happens, then that mucosal barrier gets disrupted, and the junctures in the small intestine are not tight, and therefore bad things get through, like proteins and toxins that shouldn't be in the bloodstream. That is a very bad situation for many people. Should everyone be gluten-free? You know what? I can't actually say that at this point. I do think that everyone could benefit from having less gluten in their lives, but I know that there are some categories or some people that absolutely benefit from being gluten-free, not just the celiac population. And those are the people with irritable bowel syndrome or any type of GI issue. If you have any type of GI issue, whether it be IBD or IBS or Crohn's disease, you need to be gluten-free. I really believe that the studies show that. Also, anyone with an autoimmune, because gluten really mixes up the immune process and actually creates some autoimmune responses within us. I have an autoimmune called Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and I am gluten-free because of it. Because when I'm not, the antibodies against my body actually rise for the amount of gluten that I'm eating. So I know I have to stay gluten-free for mostly gluten-free. The other population would be people with mental issues like schizophrenia. We know for sure that they do better on a gluten-free diet, as well as people with autism spectrum. So we know that they also do better. So I think a lot of people would benefit from being gluten-free. I know a lot of you probably have heard of Dr. William Davis, who wrote Wheat Belly. He has hypothesized that the wheat has changed in the last 100 years, that this is not the ancient wheat, this is not the ancient grains that we are consuming. It's grains that are much shorter. And the big deal with the grains nowadays is that, I do believe this, is that they are more glycemic. So what does glycemic mean? You know, I'm going to talk about blood sugar in just about every one of my videos because it's that important. And what happens is that you create more insulin. Insulin is a fat storage hormone. So the more wheat you have in your life, probably the more fat, more insulin you're going to have. And so that would be, it would benefit a lot of people to reduce that. Whole grains, are they much better for us? No, they really aren't. I am almost convinced that whole grains are just white grains with a good press agent. I mean, it's just really literally white with a little bit of bran added back to it. That's not a true whole grain. Whole grain is really very whole, and it's dense, and it's not fluffy and cushiony like we're used to. So those are not the best kind of grains to have. And you know, it's interesting because in 2013 there was a study that was done on Americans that stated that about 1/3 of Americans are going gluten-free. And actually that bothers me just a tad, because I see a lot of gluten-free people actually eating a lot of glycemic foods. I went into a grocery store the other day that had a gluten-free section, and do you know how many things that I could tolerate or buy in that gluten-free section? Just take a guess. 0. There was not one thing that I would purchase that was quote unquote in their gluten-free section. Do you know why? Because it was just a bunch of gluten-free processed foods, gluten-free brownie mix and cookie mix and cake mix, and you just name it. It was, you know, chips and this and that. It was like, forget it. It's all gluten-free crap. All right. So don't replace the wheat flour with potato or rice flour. Those are the two biggies when it comes to gluten-free. And they are not good for you. Because think about this, folks. Think about this. An apple is gluten-free. An avocado is gluten-free. Grass-fed beef is gluten-free naturally. Only choose those products that are naturally gluten-free. And also, listen, it's really hard sometimes because gluten can get hidden in so many things, like I said before. So you almost have to be a sleuth or detective. Think about these things. Think about all of these things having tons of gluten, especially if they're commercially made or processed. And that is graham flour and seitan and barley malt, malt vinegar, soy sauce. Always purchase tamari soy sauce. I haven't purchased real soy sauce in years. Look at your soups. Look at your commercial chili or chili that you get at a restaurant. Most of them have wheat flour in them. Commercial bouillon and deli meats and semolina flour is wheat flour. Semolina flour is wheat flour. I have patients asking me that all the time. It's like, no, that's wheat. Couscous is wheat flour. It's even in ice cream, beer. And if your oats or oatmeal don't say gluten-free. Oats don't actually have gluten in them, but most of them are prepared in a facility that does. So they have to be prepared in a facility that is completely gluten-free. Now, just remember that gliadin is really the culprit here, and gliadin actually leads to something called leaky gut. That's a dangerous place to be. Leaky gut can lead to autoimmune problems and GI problems and even psychiatric problems. So be very, very careful with the amount of gliadin or gluten, that's the protein in gluten that you are consuming. Also remember that even if you're not celiac, even if you have tested negative for celiac, you could actually be gluten intolerant. I'm not saying you are, but you could be. So just read your body. What happens when you eat a lot of gluten? How do you feel? How is your mood? So think about that. Also know that the people that suffer from IBS or any kind of GI issues, an autoimmune, psychiatric issues, or autism need to stay away from gluten. I'm gonna die on that hill. All of that population needs to stay away from gluten. Also, the big takeaway, huge takeaway, is don't replace your wheat products with gluten-free junk products that have rice and potato flour in them. In fact, they're more glycemic than the wheat flour. What does glycemic mean? Just think glycemic. Just think glycemic means inflammation and weight gain. Okay, so do you want to have more inflammation and weight gain from your gluten-free healthy products? Absolutely not, you don't. So I hope that this was beneficial to you. If it was, give me a thumbs up on this video. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. We'd love to have you. Please comment below if you are gluten-free or if you try gluten-free or you think it's just a fad or whatever. I'd love to hear your comments. And remember that you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter and like me on Facebook, Lindy Ford Nutrition and Wellness. And remember that everyone deserves to live their best life. Thank you so much.